Hello and welcome to part 2 of our LTE webinar series. I'm James Middleton, Managing Editor of Telecoms.com. So this week and next week we're going to hear from 4 industry experts who recently presented at Informa's LTE World Summit event. Each speaker is going to share their views and expertise on some of the hottest talking points in the industry, including network optimization, LTE roaming, mobile backhaul and LTE pricing models. Well, our second speaker, who's with us today, Neil Coleman, Director of Marketing at Actix, has presented on some of our webinars before. Today though, he's going to talk to you about the best practices to be drawn from Actix's experiences with over 60 operators and vendors currently rolling out networks, so you can deliver quality from day one. Some of the key points he'll cover will be on using customer demand to prioritize LTE deployments and understanding the true impact of SON on LTE. Self-organizing networks are a subject that Neil is passionate about, as the heterogeneous network looks to remain a key model for operators in the face of rapidly rising data traffic and increasing network complexity. Looking at early LTE rollouts, controlling network OpEx is one of the key challenges facing network operators, and mobile network executives have stepped up efforts to rein in network OpEx through network sharing, outsourcing, internal efficiency initiatives, and increasingly through the adoption of SON capabilities. Well, that's something that Neil's going to go into greater detail on over the next 20 minutes. Neil will also be on hand after his presentation to answer your questions. You can ask questions at any time during the presentation just by typing into the text box on the main page of this webinar, and Neil will be able to get around to answering you in real time.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Neil Coleman. I'm Actix's Director of Marketing, and today I'm going to talk about some emerging best practices for ensuring LTE rollout success. Let's go on to the agenda. Well, first I'll talk about some market trends, so what we're seeing in terms of the market and where that's driving operators and vendors. Then I want to talk about what we're seeing with our involvement in early LTE deployments, and then talk about some of the emerging best practices that are coming from there before going on to some conclusions. But first, a little bit about Actix. So Actix has been providing RAN optimization and analytics software for around 20 years. We have solutions in RAN customer experience, analysis, optimization of 2G, 3G and 4G networks as well as SON, and we also have analytics to drive and analyze LTE rollout. We've got 400 customers, so that's about 25 of the top 30 mobile operators. And probably more importantly for this session, we've announced our 60th LTE customer in May 2012. I think we're up to about 62, 63 now. So Actix has been heavily involved in the mobile space from the 2G world, the 3G world, and now on to LTE. So let's look at some market trends. Well, almost everyone at this event will be showing a slide of this nature. So it's very clear that LTE rollouts are gaining pace. There are 319 operators with plans around LTE, and that's across 97 different countries. And 72 of those networks are live, again spread over a large number of countries itself. And that's all being driven by improving device and spectrum availability. So if you look at this chart below, you can see the silver bars are showing the number of marketing announcements and marketing launches being made by network operators. So in 2012, 2013, we expect LTE launches, announcements by operators to peak. But quite clearly, rolling out any new technology is a 3 or 4 year activity, and so we believe LTE rollout activity will just grow throughout this decade. So very clear, LTE is very much real, it's happening now, and operators are starting both to announce networks and to roll them out seriously. However, it's still very much early days. I mean, most of the operators we're working with are doing marketing launches and then have small urban networks where they're kicking the tires on very lightly loaded networks. And there's a very interesting statistic that's emerging that 70% of all LTE traffic is currently carried by US operators, and that's dominated by one of the operators there as well. And the other interesting statistic that comes from this is that 70% of that traffic is being driven by the new iPad. And so you can see how we're in the very much early days where early technology adopters are driving both the rollout of LTE and also the usage of those networks themselves. So I think the clear conclusion for this, and for various other reasons that 3G and HetNets will remain the focus for most operators. The chart on the bottom kind of illustrates this point, and it shows the amount of traffic that's going to be carried by the different network technologies over the years. So the red bar at the bottom shows 2G data traffic, the blue bar, the light blue bar shows UMTS traffic, and the dark blue bar shows LTE. And you can see all the way through to 2016, UMTS will dominate the traffic being carried on mobile networks, with LTE coming in at around 20 to 30% in 2016. And the next very interesting statistic is that Informa do not believe that LTE will overtake 2G networks until 2014. So again, this just reflects the fact that LTE is the emerging network technology. It's ultimately going to dominate the access, the mobile access network. But for the next 10 years or so, it's all going to be about multi-vendor, multi-technologies networks, and the emerging HetNet. Okay. So what are we seeing in early LTE rollouts? So we've got these 60 customers. What are we seeing when they use our software and talk to us? Well, as I said before, LTE is just another part of that HetNet mix. The operators are running legacy 2G, 3G networks, and they're also exploring small cells, femto cells, and Wi-Fi offload. There's some very, very good reasons for this. The HetNet itself gives them a lot of flexibility in how they deploy access and in terms of coverage and capacity, which means they've got a lot of freedom in terms of how they spend CapEx to achieve the coverage and capacity goals that they need to make. And a classic example of this, we're seeing data coming through that is saying to deploy a carrier-grade Wi-Fi offload is often 10 times cheaper than deploying an LTE macro network. So you can see operators are mixing and matching access technologies to get the most bang for buck. And also the other kind of interesting aspect to this is that the leap from 2G to 3G in terms of the capabilities that gave the end user is much more significant than the leap from 3G to LTE. So with 3G and HSPA+, you've already got a high-speed data network. LTE will improve the performance of that, but it won't be a radical shift in terms of the capabilities that end users can undertake. Okay, so LTE is just another part of the HetNet mix. The second one, in the rollouts themselves, we're seeing typical early technology problems. We're seeing unexpected interference, we're seeing handsets with battery life issues, and we're seeing the type of problems you saw in UMTS in 2001, 2002 as the technology was just proving itself. All to be expected, all will be resolved, but definitely still indicating a technology in its early days. We're also seeing operators play around and experiment with the 2.6 gigahertz network and also refarming 1800 megahertz and waiting for that digital dividend before rolling out networks in aggression. Okay, so from a KPI perspective, we're seeing that LTE KPIs are still emerging. The lifeblood of any kind of analysis of modern mobile networks is based around key performance indicators. And these key performance indicators are typically based at the moment on the 3GPP standards. So operators really haven't gone to that next level down in terms of understanding exactly how LTE can deliver deliver good network performance and customer experience. They're still defining those second level of KPIs. Also, rollout isn't perfectly smooth. I mean, this is to be expected. It's a new technology. And operators that we're seeing, once an LTE cluster has been launched, are taking about 3 to 4 weeks to get the KPIs up to the right level. Now, again, that's down to the technology being new, but also down to the fact that they're managing these independent network equipment providers are doing the rollouts themselves. And finally, SON is gaining traction. We're seeing 3GPP and LTE SON being tried, automatic neighbor lists, auto config, PCI planning being tried, adopted, and being found to be successful. So that's what we're seeing in terms of the early rollouts themselves. So what about the emerging best practices? So this list here is kind of in order from pre-rollout to post-rollout. And I'm going to go through these relatively quickly and then cover them in more detail later. So firstly, the first best practice we're seeing is using customer demand to prioritize LTE deployments. So using knowledge of the customer, knowledge of where they are and what they're doing to prioritize the rollout of LTE. And this is really in line with kind of a general emerging theme in the industry of operators, making more use of the data they've got at hand, making more use of their customer insight they're able to get to make better business decisions. Secondly, we're seeing that operators that establish their KPIs early and bake them into vendor contracts are having much more success in getting control of those network equipment providers and getting the most out of them as they roll out the network. And this goes on to that next point, is that by making your vendors work during the rollout period, you can get much better network quality from day one, and you can get a better value for money in terms of getting a higher quality, better customer experience as the network is rolled out. And the final best practice is to move beyond 3GPP SON. So move beyond the limits of LTE SON and embrace multi-vendor, multi-technology SON. So if you go on to that first one, using customer demand to prioritize LTE, operators now are starting to have access to systems like those delivered by Actix. They can give them a very fine-grained view of what their customers are doing, where they are, what network quality they are seeing. And so this view here, which hopefully is showing up okay, is basically showing a centre of a major city at 5 p.m. at night and showing hotspots of smartphone data usage. So you can see around that central area some red areas showing very high demand from smartphones, and over in that top right-hand corner you can see another hotspot located around a building. And I think that this clearly shows is the very localized nature of hotspots. So everyone imagines that a cell tower covers a large area and demand's evenly spread, but you can see here a red area right at this major transport hub is right next to an area of very low usage below it. And what we're seeing is that demand in hotspots is 30 to 100 times higher than the demand in potentially adjacent areas to that. So highly localized. And it's by building up this picture of network demand and customer experience, operators can get a better grip of where to deploy network technologies. Okay. So if we use that customer demand, how can we use this kind of real customer intelligence to improve an LTE deployment strategy? Well, typical deployment strategies involve some traditional inputs. So what are the goals of marketing? What are your competitors' plans? Some local knowledge. Some existing site locations and understanding of network traffic. And that's great for telling you, where your phase one deployments need to be. So it's no surprise, you put it into your strategy strategy planning spreadsheet, and out pops the fact that you should roll out into the central business district. So good traditional strategy inputs. Now, by combining that with real customer intelligence, such as where your VIPs are congregating, where your roamers are, where devices are sitting on the network that can take advantage of LTE, and having that segmented out by key subscribers, you can get a much better picture of where network technology should be rolled out itself. Now, there's an interesting aspect of that, talking about unexpected hotspots. So Actix, being a radio engineering software company, we have a lot of radio engineers come into the company to work with us and become our employees. And there's a great story from one of the engineers that recently joined us from the UK about their planning of network capacity to a new football stadium that opened 3 or 4 years ago. Now, from a naive perspective, football stadium, 80,000 people congregating in one location, that's where you put all your network capacity. You saturate that area, you make sure that every football fan that wants to pick up a phone, send a tweet, upload a video can get access to the network. Whereas it turned out, when they started to really analyse the network stats, they found out that the football stadium wasn't that hot, wasn't an area of very high demand, even when football matches are on. And the reason for that, and it shouldn't be unexpected, if the football match has any kind of entertainment value, no one is going to be looking at their mobile phones. So instead, they're going to be watching the game. Now, when they did some analysis, they found out the highest hotspot was at a railway station 1 mile down the road, where all the football fans left the football station and used to wait in a queue for an hour to get the train home. And that's when everyone got on their mobile phones. So it kind of shows the fact that by getting this real customer intelligence in, you can understand exactly where the hotspots are, and that doesn't often line up with local knowledge or what you think should be happening. So when you take that real customer intelligence and combine it with a strategy, traditional strategy inputs, you can get a much more focused LTE rollout strategy, that focuses on prioritization, gets quick wins from high-value subscribers, and then, probably more importantly, as we said, the HETNet's really important, allow you to blend that in with a full HETNet rollout strategy. So does this hotspot need an additional HSPA plus carrier? Can I make use of LTE because there's a lot of LTE subscribers, potential subscribers in that place? Or should I go, because it's highly localized, for Wi-Fi offload or femtocells? So combining traditional strategy and real customer intelligence can allow an operator to get much more fine-grained in how they deploy network CapEx. Okay, so that was about kind of where to deploy LTE and all the related technologies. So now, moving on to that second best practice, which is establishing your KPIs early. So, as I said, network KPIs are the lifeblood of any network operations or network engineering activity. And we're seeing LTE KPIs emerge around accessibility, retainability, throughput, paging, and IRAT. And there's some second-tier KPIs that are emerging there. But I think the major shift that we've seen over the last few years is operators moving from managing the network to managing outsourcers and managing people that are working for them. And that's why establishing these KPIs early and baking them into contracts like rollout contracts and outsource contracts will help an operator make that leap from managing things to managing outsourcers. Now, the first example of this is making the vendors work for you during rollout. So network rollout and LTE rollout is a very significant activity that an operator will undertake. It involves billions of dollars of cash going from the operator to the network equipment provider itself. And invariably, we found that operators that build these KPIs early, bake them into contracts, and then take very tight control of the network equipment provider as that rollout is occurring, get better day one network quality. They get better value for money out of the network equipment provider itself. And they do this by doing a thorough, deep network acceptance process. So that is building dashboards that show the progress that the operator is the network equipment provider is making as they roll out the network, shows you what KPIs they're delivering. And then for each site and each cluster, develop deep contractual level KPI reports that assess whether the network equipment provider has met their minimum requirements to roll out and accept that network itself. So by using this, operators can basically provide unambiguous, detailed evidence of network performance to the network equipment provider to say, I am not accepting this site yet, it doesn't meet quality criteria, or if things go well, well done, you're keeping the KPIs up. And we've seen this approach be much more successful than more informal approaches where maybe the operator bangs the fist on the table for the first couple of rollouts when they go badly and then lets the vendor have free rein. What we've seen here, by keeping strict control across the whole rollout process, better network quality from day one, and better kind of return on investment for that network equipment rollout itself. But obviously, and we've talked about this kind of shift being made from managing the equipment to managing the outsourcers, this takes a level of automation that to pull in that data automatically, produce those reports, produce those dashboards. And in some operators, we see them try to ramp up kind of a shadow engineering team to manage the outsourcer and to ensure that they're doing a good job. But obviously, ramping up an engineering team is very expensive. So what Actix recommends is that you invest in KPI analysis and analytics and automation to get this rollout process and rollout reporting and acceptance process as streamlined as possible. Okay. And so some final comments about moving beyond 3GPP SON. So it's clear from all the stuff that's gone before, and some other presenters have touched on, is that LTE networks, will not sit in isolation. They will be layered on top of existing 2G and 3G networks. And what we're seeing is that operators are having success with LTE SON. The automatic neighbour list seems to work well. PCI planning seems to work fine, and so does automatic configuration. And we're seeing, as a vendor of SON solutions and optimization solutions, we're seeing this as kind of proving out what we've been talking about for a number of years. It's always difficult for companies like Actix to go in and say you've got to automate your network to death and convince the operators they'll get good results. Whereas when they see an existing 3GPP based LTE SON working quite well on LTE, they're much more open to 2G and 3G SON. So we believe operators should embrace 2G and 3G and multi-vendor SON on the back of seeing LTE SON work successfully. And also we think, going back to that view I showed earlier about network demand and customer experience in that major city, we believe that using customer data to focus these SON activities is going to deliver some really powerful results. So instead of the network happily optimizing itself and happily making sure that its parameters stay in range, what you really want to tell the network is to optimize the network to maximize the experience of your most valuable customers. So taking inputs from this customer experience data and combining it with SON algorithms, we think is going to deliver some major benefits to operators themselves. Okay, and then finally on to some conclusions. I think from the early slides you saw that LTE is quite clearly gaining momentum, but it won't be the same as UMTS. You won't be rolling out a new data network effectively for the first time. It'll be in the context of a HETnet. It will take many years, but during that time, operators will be in a multi-vendor, multi-technology environment. And so all of this means that new approaches and solutions are required. And these solutions need to leverage true customer insight. They need to do automatic analytics and KPI reporting to keep your outsourcers and your network equipment providers in check. And they need, ultimately, when the network is launched, to do heterogeneous network, multi-vendor, multi-technology SON, and deliver an optimization platform and framework that will manage the entire HETnet.
So it was interesting to hear from Neil about the teething issues of LTE there, interference and battery life, all signs of technology in the early stages. But also it was great to hear his thoughts on LTE as just another part of the HETnet mix. Well, as I said, now you have the opportunity to ask him your own questions. You can type these into the text field on the main page of this webinar, and Neil will respond to you in real time. All that's left for me to say is thank you very much for joining us today on Telecoms.com.